The dust of the election has settled, and in the Commons, everybody is going out of their way to be incredibly nice to each other. So this is an appropriate day to start to talk about something which went, I think, badly wrong during this campaign. Outbreaks of intimidation and misogyny around the country. The behaviour came sometimes from people who feel very strongly about the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza, and so they should. And the very last thing I want to do is to smear large groups of people with a charge of menacing or thuggish behaviour. But painting child killer on somebody's office, warning a candidate's assistant there is a bullet with your name on it, pursuing an MP so they feel hunted. Some people involved have asked that we say nothing at all about this because talking about it just makes things worse. But I have seen online threats and heard accounts of things going on which are just not acceptable in our democracy, and it's the job of journalism to call stuff like this out. The newly elected Speaker of the Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, is clearly also concerned, as he told my colleague Nick Ferrari this morning, beginning with the case of Nigel Farage having a mug hurled at him while campaigning.
I am very, very concerned. I met with Nigel yesterday. I said, it was a milkshake, but it could have been something worse. I am very concerned that people feel that they have the right to intimidate members or people who are putting themselves up for election. The fact that MPs are elected also suffer abuse they should never suffer.
The Speaker there. Let's talk now to LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Chambray, who has been looking at this story. Aggie, this is quite widespread.
Yeah, it is indeed. I mean, I've spoken to multiple people today who have told me about what they call bullying and harassment, where Gaza was a key issue. These are people that ran for Parliament, and lots of people I've spoken to talked about very, very personal attacks. One person talked about being chased and shouted as she walked down the street. A family member of hers was then also followed down the street, shouted at and filmed. I mean, she called it intimidation. She was screamed at in the face and called a genocide agent, and she felt it was misogyny. She was chased out of a building that she was in, and it's not just her. There are others, as I say. One person felt it wasn't safe for them to bring their children out campaigning. Another person accused of being responsible for killing children in Gaza.
Aggie, it's very hard to be specific about this, but are you suggesting that it is more the case for women candidates than for men?
Well, it's definitely the case for both, but the women I spoke to said they felt that it was misogyny. They felt even the idea of being chased down the street and shouted at, they felt the idea that they didn't know that is intimidating, the idea that people didn't understand that they couldn't then campaign by themselves, couldn't bring their children out. And so females that ran for Parliament, either candidates or now MPs, did feel that it was misogyny. Being followed in cars on foot, it's really, really grim stuff, Andrew.
Really horrible stuff. And below this, as it were, there's another campaign that is away from the mainstream media being fought on WhatsApp groups in particular.
That is what people talked about. The idea that people weren't actually clear how many votes they were losing, whether or not they were going to lose their seat, because a lot of these campaigns were fought on WhatsApp and lots of people talking on WhatsApp under the surface. I mean, someone who did win said to me they were shocked by how close it was. They expected a strong challenge, but not that strong. And they felt definitely a lot was going on in WhatsApp, and they felt it blindsided normal campaigners.
I think this is really disturbing, Aggie. Thank you very much indeed for that. And it's something that's been happening particularly in the West Midlands and East London. For those who didn't hear it at the time, here's Jess Phillips just after being heckled at her election count.
The election that I have...
This will be a warning. I will be asking people to leave unless we get this completed.
I will carry on with my speech. I understand that a strong woman standing up to you is met with such reticence. Anyway, this election has been... Can you throw them out?
The inimitable Jess Phillips there. Shabana Mahmood, the new Lord Chancellor and proud Muslim who won Birmingham Ladywood, said the campaign there had been sullied by harassment and intimidation. This wasn't just an assault on us, she said. This was an assault on democracy itself. British politics must soon wake up to what happened at this election in Ladywood and a handful of other seats. Now, one of those MPs who lost to a Gaza candidate was the former Labour attack dog and and Shadow and Pension Secretary Jonathan Ashworth. He was beaten in Leicester South by Shochat Adam, an independent who said his victory was for the people of Gaza. Ashworth lost a previous majority of 22,000. It was one of the biggest shocks of the night, and he is with me here. Jonathan, what kind of campaign was it for you?
Well, can I just start by paying tribute to Jess Phillips and Shabana Mahmood, two brilliant women. I am so pleased that they're in a Labour government. And didn't they put these loudmouth bullies in their place when they spoke at their counts just then? But look, of Gazan children on my hands. This is the campaign that was run by a minority of bullies and loudmouths. This is not representative of the many Muslim constituents I was proud to represent. This is not in the name this is not in Muslim values. And look, a campaign was organised nationally by a national organisation called The Muslim Vote, whose campaign was clear on their website. Punish MPs. That's the words they used.
The word was punish, was it?
Punish MPs. It wasn't, we want to effect change on a set of policy issues. Like many of the policy issues I fought on, whether that's calling for a ceasefire, calling for Palestinian statehood, calling for student finance arrangements for Muslim young people in our constituency, punish MPs is what the Muslim Vote organisation talked about.
What kind of things happened to you? You sound pretty angry about this.
I was chased down the street, shouted at and screamed at for 45 minutes until I had to seek refuge literally in a vicarage, and they waited for me outside the vicarage, and even when I came out of the vicarage they were shouting at me with megaphones, leaflets going around accusing me of being Genocide John, anonymous leaflets, all in the name of the successful candidate who won't be able to do anything, who will stand exposed and impotent, not able to effect change, accusing me of genocide, of having blood on my hands. The vitriol is like something I have never seen, even though I've called for a ceasefire, even though I've called for Palestinian statehood. I even had a Palestinian heritage individual who grew up in a refugee camp in Lebanon come and campaign for me, and they accused him of not actually being a real Palestinian, these people. It was extraordinary.
Did you feel physically threatened at any point?
Well, no, I'm a working class lad from Manchester. I mean, they didn't scare me when they came chasing after me in the streets. But I always stand up to bullies and loudmouths.
What about wider friends and family?
What I thought I was very worried about, though, was when some of the videos which Mr. Shochat Adam Patel, the new MP, shared, highly irresponsible in my view, got shared by Tommy Robinson. So you have an MP sharing videos, or a candidate at the time sharing videos, now shared by Tommy Robinson. Highly irresponsible behaviour in my view. But obviously you're worried about your family. Obviously you worry about your children. I mean, I was campaigning with my 10-year-old because she wanted to help Daddy on election day, and one of these loudmouths shouted at me that I was Genocide John, and everybody despised me. That was in front of my 10-year-old.
How did that make you feel?
Made me feel pretty angry, but it made me feel pretty upset on behalf of my 10-year-old little girl.
The kind of thing that simply should not be happening.
No, we can have you know me. You've described me as the attack dog.
I did. So you have been.
I can look after myself.
Yeah.
I'm known for robust, cut and thrust debate, politely, but I always treat my opponents with respect, and I never personally attack them like this.
Let me come back to the sort of fundamental politics of this, because one of your former colleagues, Thangam Debonair, has spoken today about this, and she has a slightly different analysis. She said that she thinks the Labour Party has a problem with not having a clear narrative about Gaza, and that's had consequences for you all.
No, I slightly disagree on that. But obviously every candidate who's lost will want to reflect on their own circumstances. The Labour Party went into this election saying we wanted an immediate ceasefire, saying we wanted to get Palestinian statehood back on the table and find a negotiated two-state solution, saying we wanted to ensure that the UN aid agency funding flowed into Palestine, wanting to look at the legal arguments around arms sales, and wanting to see international law endorsed. Indeed, some of the first things that Keir Starmer did when he spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu was reiterate his calls for an immediate ceasefire. And if the UK's foreign policy can help bring about an immediate ceasefire, that's because we have a Labour government, not because we have 5 impotent, independent MPs.
not just impotent, but MPs that I assume most Labour MPs won't want to talk to now.
Well, it's up to colleagues to talk whether they want to talk to them. But we know in the end, these people in Leicester or Dewsbury or wherever they are will not be able to influence change. And all the improvements in the life of people in Leicester, from the NHS to the cost of living, will be because of a Labour government now, not because of an impotent independent MP.
You had this huge majority, 22,000, and it went. That must have been a huge shock. I was very interested in what Aggie was saying just now about a campaign conducted under the surface on WhatsApp groups that most of, as it were, traditional politics completely missed. Is that how it felt for you?
Oh, absolutely. There is a really interesting bit of analysis to be done on this, and this hopefully is something I can be looking at in this new role, where I've become the chief executive of a big, important Labour think tank called Labour Together. The TikTok and social media and algorithmic politics, if you like, where you're unfortunately, a lot of my constituents are sadly probably not listening to LBC. Andrew, I'm really sorry to say that.
They should be ashamed of themselves.
They're consuming media from all kinds of TikTok. Let me tell you this. The video of the guy hassling me in the street and bullying and shouting me and harassing me and all that, and screaming in my face, right? It got WhatsApp round. A friend of mine, a Muslim friend of mine in my constituency, got it sent to him. Do you know where he got it from? It was sent to him by one of his family members in Zambia.
It's global, this.
Within minutes. That's how quickly this stuff spreads. It is extraordinary.
So there is a whole issue there for politics and how it gets to grips with this. Now, you expertly mentioned your new job, which I was going to come to. Labour Together is often described as the Starmer-right think tank. It's not Blair-right, it's not hard left, it is distinctive. Just tell us a little bit about how you understand its politics. Well,
I mean, Labour Together has played a phenomenal role in Keir Starmer's and the Labour Party's victory last week. It has provided, in my view, the intellectual ballast, both organisationally but in policy development as well. We have been the organisation was at the forefront in helping our team develop our economic policy, our industrial strategy, our green policy, and I'm really, really thrilled to be now in this role as we think about the next general election.
So you will be sitting there, as it were, near the heart of government, saying, don't forget the politics, don't forget the politics, don't forget the politics, there's another election coming.
Well, exactly. And as you know, if you look at in history, Labour governments have not done great historically at winning full second terms. Harold Wilson was very good in 1966, Tony Blair in 2001. We are thinking now about the coalition of voters that are needed to win Labour a second term, and we're going to be doing a lot of thought at that. And obviously, what has been going on in these inner city communities is something we're going to be looking at as well.
Well, pray God Gaza is not an issue in 5 years' time. But what about the threat of reform? Because they are now behind you in second place, and I think about 90 constituencies around the country.
Yeah, you can see how the electoral map has changed radically from the last election. And one of the lessons, I think, has to be, don't assume one set of election results will necessarily translate or will just be sort of copied in the second election. If you think back to 2019, we're probably having discussions not in your then days BBC studio, asking ourselves questions about could the Labour Party ever recover, and is this a fundamental realignment for the Tories? So we mustn't make the mistake of thinking just one set of results will remain static for the next election. But you're right. We have to take the reform threat seriously. We have to take the fight to reform. Now, we have to point out that the positions they've taken, particularly the international positions around Russia and Ukraine, are not in the national interest. And I think that's going to become a feature of Labour politics. And whoever my successor as Labour's attack dog is will be making those points in your studios over the next few years.
Jonathan, we began by talking about the most horrible election campaign you say you have ever fought. Has that put you off standing again, or do you see yourself as somebody who is going to go back into the fight in due course?
Nothing puts me off.
Nothing puts you off.
I'm as my dad's not here anymore because, as people know, we had a drink problem and sadly left the world because of his alcohol. But the one thing he always used to say to me, he used to say, Jonathan, you're hard as nails, and I am. And we'll see if I'm back or not.
The hard as nails, Jonathan Ashworth. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio, Jonathan. And I should say that we did invite Shaukat Adam onto the programme, and he has agreed to come on next week.